Right on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit, we saw this big image that surfaced of Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping shaking hands in Johannesburg. Chinese President Xi Jinping seen talking to Modi. Prime Minister Modi and Xi sharing that stage at BRICS Summit, and a brief chat as they had while they were walking towards their chairs. First Modi-Xi handshake since the Galwan clash. That's the image that you see there. Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi having a brief chat. Of course, we're still unsure of whether this will translate into a meeting or not between the Prime Minister and Xi Jinping. Bilateral talks would happen or not is still unclear. But yet this image speaks aloud. Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping seen for the first time talking post the Galwan clash. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping sharing stage on the BRICS Summit, and we see here a clear look at the Prime Minister and Xi Jinping chatting while they walk to assume their chairs. This is the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg, and for the first time after Galwan clashes, we see the Prime Minister and Xi Jinping shaking hands and having a brief chat as they walk towards taking their chairs at the BRICS Summit. In fact, we saw Prime Minister speaking at the BRICS Summit as well. We heard him mention the Chandrayaan's success, the mission, and also commitment to the principles of the BRICS Summit. And while that happened, it was just around the time when they were walking towards their chairs that Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping both chatted with each other very briefly. It was barely a few, we could say about a minute, while they walked towards their chairs. They chatted, shook hands, and Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping assumed their chairs. This is just before the BRICS Summit speech happened. We're playing that image out for you. Peter Van Onselen joining us right from Johannesburg. I'm going to cut to him right at this moment. Peter, of course, India decoding this very image that we see on our screens of Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping shaking hands, having a brief chat as they walk towards assuming their chairs at the BRICS Summit. Tell us more on the buzz about this bonhomie that we saw briefly between the Prime Minister and Chinese President.
Yeah, well, we are just getting word now, and it's the first time that it's been mentioned since the BRICS Summit has started. And it's from a leading news agency here in Johannesburg that the Chinese ambassador to South Africa has confirmed that the two countries will indeed hold talks. I'm just paraphrasing what they said here. He has downplayed the tensions between the two countries and said they have a lot of common interests and some problems. So this is the first word, unofficial, albeit unofficial, that the two countries will be meeting possibly in the coming hours, and those visuals that we just saw may be indicative of what's to come in the next few hours, that some kind of agreement has been reached to try and sit down around a table and talk. That both of these countries, India and China, have backed an expansion of BRICS. There may be issues around who they would like to see join BRICS, as well as the border disputes, maybe that topic could be discussed. But in terms, this is the first time we've heard in the last few days that discussions may well happen, and this morning's pictures may well be indicative of that. So it'll be interesting to see whether those discussions do take place.
Right. This handshake, of course, speaks aloud for the only reason because there's been a lot of talk and buzz around a meeting that could be likely possible. Even the Indian diplomats did not give a hard no. In fact, have been positive of having of maybe scheduling a meeting with Xi Jinping. That's on the Indian side, has been very receptive. But from the Chinese side, do we know, have you heard a word on whether Xi Jinping is interested or looking forward to, one, the G20 meet in India, and two, to actually address the aggression that China has been posing along the Indian borders?
He seems to have been a difficult guy to get hold of this week, apart from obviously his official engagements. As we heard earlier, he did not attend the opening BRICS Business Forum. No one knew why he didn't go there. and he was obviously on a state visit as well. So he's seemingly quite a difficult guy to get hold of. There's obviously a lot of interpreting issues as well. It's not a matter of, sitting down and being able to discuss in one language. Often the language barrier does pose timing issues. But it seems, though, from these pictures that we're seeing this morning, that and from the words of the Chinese ambassador to South Africa, that they are willing to sit down around the table and talk to the Indian officials, to Narendra Modi. And it really is, I think, a matter of time. The Chinese are a massive economy, and they seem to have agreed on most items brought ahead this week at the BRICS conference. They've agreed on the expansion. They've agreed on the possibility of a BRICS currency. They've agreed on most items. There's been no sense of disagreement on any issues raised at any of the forums here during the BRICS Summit.
Right. Well, this is certainly unclear yet whether Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping are going to have a formal bilateral talk. But the BRICS Summit, by and large, has been successful for India in the sense of Prime Minister Modi there. Like Peter said a little earlier, is the flavor of that meet. He has been lauded for, of course, the Chandrayaan's successful mission, and also Prime Minister Modi in a position to suggest and recommend several changes for the BRICS bloc. Tell us more on that front. Speaking of Prime Minister's suggestions, you did highlight a little earlier. We'd like you to reiterate yet again on what was proposed by India.
Yeah, he was extremely happy. I mean, it was quite ironic that he was here in Johannesburg upon the landing of the Chandrayaan. He was there watching. He'd obviously had meetings in the morning. He addressed a BRICS forum in the morning, just a few hours before the landing. So I think it was no coincidence that he was planning on watching it, and that his officials had planned for him to just sit and watch the landing. And we watched it here live in Johannesburg as well. And you could see the excitement. It's been as I said last night on India Today, it's been a tiring trip for the Indian Prime Minister. He traveled a few nights ago. He arrived here and he was straight into back-to-back meetings, back-to-back, sessions of the BRICS Summit. So this really gave him, a bit of a boost in his step. He's been at that summit last night. He was at the banquet last night. He sat next to the Russian Foreign Secretary, Sergei Lavrov. He also got sat next to Cyril Ramaphosa. Lots of images coming out from that banquet last night. Him chatting to a lot of other heads of states who are here about the landing on the moon, and there was real excitement. Right. And we need to understand this is not just about landing on the moon. This is a big power shift in the space and aviation industry as well. Spoken about.
Undoubtedly, it does put India in a position of power in many different ways.